All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. We're just letting some other people into the lobby, but I'm just going to get started as they trickle in. My name is Tom Swenson, and I work at NHDES. If we haven't met before, I'm the NIPD's Education and Outreach Coordinator, and we want to welcome everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces in the chat, but for those that we meet with on a monthly basis, both our MS4 contacts and our consultants, welcome. And for those that we haven't met, thank you for coming, other municipal staff and organizations. We're putting on these refresher workshops. We did one in January going over structural control refreshers. And then we're doing a non-structural today and just a refresher on how to do this. And the reason we're doing this is because we know during year 6, there were many MS4, New Hampshire MS4 permittees that had started using PTAP, but we know that there were others that weren't able to. And that was for a variety of reasons. We know that there was a time constraint because it was a short turnaround to get your information into PTAP, but we wanted to make sure we gave additional time during this year 7 of the MS4 permit, so you could get your information into PTAP and learn how to use it. So this workshop is going to apply for those that have used PTAP in the past and those that are completely fresh to it. So you're going to learn either kind of get a refresher or learn completely, but it'll work for both. During this workshop, if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll make sure to get around to all those questions. And just some background information, a lot of what we've talked about at both coalition meetings in the past, the couple months, has been about the 2024 draft Massachusetts MS4 permit. The chairs, UNH, and a few other organizations, along with DES, has gone through the draft Massachusetts permit and have pulled out some of the requirements that could potentially apply to New Hampshire. As we've shared in the past, we've heard from EPA that the goal is to make the new Massachusetts MS4 permit and the new New Hampshire MS4 permit as similar as possible. So this draft Massachusetts permit has kind of given us a hint into what's to come potentially for New Hampshire. And one of the things we pulled out, and one of the things we've been making sure that we've been emphasizing, is that nutrient tracking in the draft Massachusetts MS4 permit is required for all permittees. So all permittees would have to have a way to track their nutrient reductions. So we want to make sure we mention that for all of our MS4 permittees, that maybe you currently don't have to track your nutrient reductions, but now is a great opportunity to get ahead of that curve. So if potentially the same requirement making everyone track their nutrient reductions comes to New Hampshire in the draft New Hampshire MS4 permit, you'll be ready to go. And before we get into that too, I want to show everyone the website. So if you haven't gone to the PTAP website before, if you go to the New Hampshire MS4 website, and you can easily do that just by Googling New Hampshire MS4, we're the first thing that pops up. Go to NH Resources, you're going to see Pollutant Tracking and Accounting Project. Right down here, as you scroll down, there is this PTAP database button. That's what gets you there. And then there's information on here, how to register to PTAP, how to use it, some other resources. And down below here, I think I have to refresh my page. We just updated this with some information. There's all of our previous PTAP recordings, both that we've done and also ones that MAM has put on as well. The structural control data entry refresher workshop that we did on January 14th is right here for those that weren't able to attend or would like to look it over. Right. And so before I throw it over to Jamie Houle and Daniel McAdam from the UNH Stormwater Center to actually talk about PTAP, I wanted to take a second and do a quick refresher on some of the MS4 requirements. Most of you probably know this, but for those that are watching this recording later on, or if you're new to the process, just a really quick refresher. We're not going to go into it in detail. As we've mentioned in the past, PTAP is open to all New Hampshire MS4 communities, regardless of what impairments you have. So you can use PTAP to track both your structural and non-structural nutrient reductions. Permittees with phosphorus TMDLs, nitrogen impairments, and phosphorus impairments are required to track their nutrient reductions, and PTAP is a way to do that. For those that fall under Appendix F that have a phosphorus TMDL, when you created your lake phosphorus control plan, there were a few requirements that you had to meet, basically involving nutrient tracking. 2 of those requirements were your performance evaluation, which requires the tracking of the amount of phosphorus reductions achieved through implemented structural and non-structural BNPs. PTAP can do that. And there's also the requirement for the tracking the amount of phosphorus increases resulting from new development in the LPCP area. We're still working through how to best approach that requirement, but it is something that we're looking into. Also, for those that have phosphorus TMDLs, you have to do annual calculation recording or reporting. And that has a lot to do with PTAP again, because you need to track your non-structural BNP reductions and your structural BNP reductions. So PTAP can help you do that. Also, for those that have phosphorus TMDLs, and this ties into a lot with what Daniel and Jamie are going to talk about today, is that you had to implement some sort of non-structural controls. And those non-structural controls that were laid out in the permit include you have your enhanced street and enhanced street pavement cleaning program, catch basin cleaning, your turf grass fertilizer management with no applications of fertilizer that contain phosphorus, and the enhanced organic waste and leaf litter collection program. These were the ones that were found in attachment 2 of Appendix F. And these you can put into PTAP to help track it. We had recommended for those that have a phosphorus TMDL that you at least do the street sweeping and catch basin cleaning, because you're already doing that. You should be getting credit for it. And Jamie and Daniel are going to go over that. But we also wanted to mention if you're doing some additional non-structural controls, you can enter that information into PTAP too, and we'll go over that in a little bit. And then lastly, for those with nitrogen and phosphorus impairments, you just have to track any structural BMPs that you implement within your regulated area. And when we're talking about tracking structural BMPs, we're talking about documenting the type of BMP, the total area treated by the BMP, the design storage volume, and the estimated nitrogen removed in mass per year. So that's some of the background or a refresher for some of you. That's why we're all here for the MS4 requirements. But again, anyone can use PTAP. And then lastly, we wanted to announce, and we'll talk about this more at the upcoming coalition meetings as well, the deadline to get in your PTAP data, both your structural and non-structural, for year 7 is July 1st, 2025. Or excuse me, July 31st, 2025. So this is giving you several months compared to year 6, where it was only a couple weeks to get your information into PTAP. So we're hoping that by doing this earlier, it's giving you additional time to process and learn how to get this information in, and it won't be as much of a rush. I'm going to throw it over to Jamie now to start to go into the actual PTAP stuff. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Great. Thank you. And Tom, can you see my screen? All right. Well, thank you very much and good morning. I think, the mascot for PTAP was always this ship in the fog. And I think we have to reconsider that mascot. Because I think that we have a lot of clarity now. And certainly with all the uncertainty in the world, this feels like a really safe place right now, because I mean this is basic math and it's pretty straightforward. And hopefully that's what you get out of today. This is not rocket science. There is some ambiguity and some questions, but it's just with respect to, is the math adequate enough to complete the calculation? So the calculation is very straightforward. It's very similar for all structural and non-structural controls. And we're just going to dive in a little bit to the non-structural controls in this. But again, I kind of feel like we're sort of over the rainbow now. And, the difficulty we had is really creating the structure. The math was always the easy part. So now that the structure's been created, I think, we just got to populate the database and demonstrate. And the database helps demonstrate all the great implementation work that communities are doing throughout New Hampshire. The outcomes really are to introduce you, again, walk you through the database. We have done significant changes, mainly from responses we get from end users. So, the process is you use it, you identify weaknesses or things that could be improved in the database. You send us an email or communicate with us in some fashion. And the team that we have, at least with research, the UNH Research Computing Center, is really great. And they're on top of this, and they usually get that implemented within days. So last class, I think we ran into a glitch But we identified it during the class and we had it fixed the very next day. So it wasn't anything necessarily with respect to the functionality of the database. It was just we've recently updated to I don't know, Drupal 20 or whatever it is. It seems like they're always updating the database, and that's one of the benefits we have of this being hosted by RCC is they take care of all that for us. And yeah, so um, we're also in the process of redesigning the database so that our annual reports can be expedited and where we used to use the BAT, um, the EPA BMP tracking and accounting tool or accounting and tracking tool. We're going to attempt to be using our own calculator. It's all the same math again, but we've had several improvements to the database, so those are not necessarily reflected in BAT, and it's largely with respect to non-structural controls. So we just wanted to cover real quick. Tom showed you the website on the MS4 blog. That is going to be and continue to be our homepage uh, for the foreseeable future for PTAP. At UNH, we moved into cooperative extension, and it's the PTAP site is a little bit buried. So all the same content and more is on the MS4 blog, and that's what we're directing people to the go-to spot in the future. When you click on the database, you'll get a screen like this, and then your option here is to log in. If you don't have a username, it will ask you for your email and it'll ask you for a password. If you do have a username and forgot it, there is also um, a button that allows you to uh, create a new password, and that's essentially how the database is set up. They don't issue you kind of it just kind of kicks you if you forgot your password, it kicks you back into the login screen and asks you to develop a new password. So all your same information will be there. You'll just be asked to create a new password. Um, so that's kind of the process of registering. Hopefully, many of you have registered after last course and have had a chance to kind of poke around. We'll get into more of the details later. Um, the the use levels have been, and this is really the main functionality of PTAP because the math and the accounting is pretty straightforward and already established. What PTAP essentially is, it's a user authenticated tracking database. So it allows you to track the implementation efforts again in your community. So the administrator levels, we have the super administrator, which is RCC, so they control everything. The site administrators are Daniel, myself, Tom, and Sally. So we can help you if you're running into problems registering, or we can help you if you misdiagnosed yourself or mischaracterize your actual activity. And so we can do a number of those things. We can help you edit your submissions, which we did for some folks last year if you're having trouble. So that's what the site administrator can do. There's only a limited number, just because again, the integrity of the database is the main goal here behind these permission levels. The next is the town administrator. So we ask every town to identify a database administrator. That database administrator can see all the entries for that town or municipality. And they have the added responsibility of accepting it into the database. So there's a range of different classifications for projects that are entered into the database that can track that project as it moves through the permitting process from new submission all the way through built and or implemented and constructed. So if it's stuck in planning board, that you can identify it as it's under review. Once it's completed, then the town administrators move it into implemented and constructed, and that is an important feature because that's probably the main responsibility of the town administrator is to one, verify that this project is actually happening. It's not some malicious entry from, some rogue blogger. It is actually happening in your community, and your responsibility is to reclassify it once it gets implemented. Once it has a classification of implemented and constructed, then it goes into the accounting. So the accounting step only accounts for things that are implemented and constructed. So that's the major, I guess, task of the town administrator. We also added town employee because we understand that you might want to share entries that are coming into your community with different employees within your municipal staff so that they can see, that they can review, and then they can provide guidance. We can also authorize more than one town administrator. We just say, just be careful, as the town administrator has the ability to change and alter all the entries. So, you want to be sure that one administrator isn't undoing or redoing or um, doing something inappropriate to undo what the other administrator has done. And then the last is the authenticated user. So everybody that can apply for an account, and the authentication is really just does this look like a real email, or does this have like crazy scripts? So Sally and I usually joke that this is a kind of a weekly occurrence for us. We get lots of uh, authenticated users applying, and we try to weed them out and identify those that are useful. I don't know why hackers are trying to get into the database, but it happens more often than we think. So that said, if you have applied for an account and you haven't received anything, please reach out to us. Either we're on vacation, or maybe it was a weird email, and like goofball 14, and we thought it was not real, and it turns out to be real. We can adjust it. So I think that's yeah, let us know if you have any problems. So now, getting into the database, when you want to so Daniel's going to step through kind of how you go through the database. I'm just kind of setting things up. When you add a submission, and today we're going to focus on non-structural BMP. So you'll have a structural BMP, you'll have a non-structural BMP section, and then you'll have a land use change section. So for things like non-structural controls, there's not usually an attendant land use change associated with the activity. You're not taking down forests, you're not constructing things, so you're not really changing land use. Therefore, it's a much easier entry into the database. The most cumbersome part of PTAP is the land use change form, and that's just tracking changes in land use that are typically, towards a more impervious, more developed land use. So, you're changing a field or a meadow or an agricultural land to a low density residential subdivision or something like that. And that's probably the hardest, most cumbersome thing to track in the database, because we have to, there's a lot of components that go into it. On the non-structural side, there's not really a land use change, so you don't even have to deal with that. For retrofits, structural retrofits, same thing. Don't even worry about the land use change. Nothing has been altered. All you're doing is building in additional controls into the already built environment. So those are the easiest of the entries into the database. For non-structural control, there's a drop-down menu. For clarity, we only have two non-structural efforts that are actually accounted for, and that is catch basin cleaning and street sweeping. The reason why, it's just because the consensus on some of the other non-structural controls, there are numerous, hasn't been reached on how to credit it. So, the one caveat, I think, is the fertilizer control program, which there is a 33% reduction calculated based on a phosphorus pledge by the municipality. Right now, this is only extended to municipally owned lands. So, I think this is the area where we're focused on next. And what we'd really like to do on the fertilizer program is develop more of a panel to assess the credit and the effectiveness of the credit and update it. So in the new draft mass permit, you can take credit for structural controls implemented on private property. Why can't we do that for fertilizer? I think it's pretty easy. We just have to reach consensus on, um, the method and the science and the math behind it, essentially. So, um, there's all kinds of other things. IDD efforts. If you're already reporting in the MS4 that if you identify illicit connections and are eliminating them, you're already reporting those. We're working on the math right now to, how to calculate it. So it's not that these don't have an impact. It's just that there hasn't been broad consensus that's been worked through EPA and DES to agree on the methodology behind the calculation. So things like pet waste program, you can still report in PTAP. There's just no real units associated with it. So there is an other category or a comment category. So if you are developing a pet waste program, add in the units that you're tracking. What that helps us with is you identify the units that are easy to report, and then the math will utilize the easily reported units. So that's the whole idea behind it. Um, we will be updating the sewering credit, which was developed through the Great Bay Total Nitrogen Air Permit, and we will be updating that very soon. Right now, it's just been two communities that have actually um, taken point of view septic into their wastewater treatment plant. So that is a non-point source credit that we are tracking under the Great Bay Total Nitrogen Permit. We developed a method, and we will then enter that into PTAP. And this is really the power of PTAP, as everybody's tracking in the same way. As the science improves, as the methods improve and give you better credit or more representative credit for the actual activity, we can easily transition because you're all tracking in the same way. So that's the beauty of this program. Um, there's one math and there's one way to do it, and that then allows us to easily transition as the science improves. All right. So I think what we're recommending is, I think Tom mentioned it, uh, enter in the one structural control that you did in year 6 for the MS4 permit, and at minimum track your catch basin cleaning and street sweeping. So the street sweeping credit Daniel will go over, but it already includes the updates that, at least to the model, that are in the draft mass MS4. So we're already doing, we anticipate virtually the same thing. So we're already doing that. The difference is the measured approach it wasn't, I guess, highlighted in the draft mass permit. There is a comment period. We are commenting on that. But we do have authorization at least to use it in the Great Bay. So if you're unsure, just pick the measured credit and sorry, the model credit. The model credit has the up-to-date information. All right, and then help us with entering new things that you're doing, innovative things that you're doing, and adding those units that you're easily tracking. And as we see more and more entries around a non-structural control that hasn't been received credits, that's when we'll begin to pick something like that up and develop the consensus, the scientific consensus, in order to credit it as it's as needed. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. Maybe if there's any questions, um, please feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, I'll hand it off to Danny McGowan.
Right. So we're just going to walk through two examples, actually entering them into PTAP. As Jamie said, the two most common non-structural BMPs that you're already doing that we recommend you enter into PTAP are catch basin cleaning and street sweeping. So we're just going to pick two examples, one for each of those, and put it into PTAP. So catch basin cleaning, there are two options for the units. The accepted units for the permits as well as the BAT are acres. So that's acres of impervious surface managed. That's often hard to calculate or estimate. You know, you're just counting the number of catch basins. So if you happen to know the acreage managed, you can enter that directly. If you don't, the second option that we put in there is the number of catch basins cleaned, with the assumption that each catch basin has about 4,000 square feet of managed footprint per catch basin. So, you know, you can count those over the year. You don't have to have one entry for every catch basin. If, you know, it could just be one entry for your town for this year, we put in X number of catch basins cleaned. And then that'll be calculated, converted to acreage, and then you'll get credit for each of those. So for this example, we're just going to put in 30 catch basins. Keep it simple. Next one is going to be the model of street sweeping. As Jamie said, we have a measured approach as well, but the model is easier to account. Right now, this table shows the different options for the model street sweeping. So first you have the technologies available. That's what kind of sweeper you have. High efficiency regenerative air vac, mechanical broom, and vacuum assisted. Next is the frequency. So how often are you sweeping? Every month, twice a year during the two heavy periods of spring and the fall, or weekly. And again, similar to the catch basin cleaning, we have two units that you can enter. Both get credit. It's just whatever you have available for information. Again, acreage is kind of the final unit that's used for calculation, but we also have an estimated lane miles swept. So that lane miles is converted to an acreage, which will then get credit. So for this example, we're going to have 100 lane miles swept with a broom sweeper and swept in spring and fall. So one thing to note here with the frequency, there is it has to be implemented for a certain number of months. And this can cause a little bit of confusion for some people in the past. The months implemented, you put 12. So that means that you implemented this strategy for the whole year, but the frequency that was actually swept was spring and fall, twice per year. So if you put like 2 months implemented, that's actually multiplied by the twice per year, so you actually get a reduced credit. So make sure you put it months implemented is always going to be 12.
Hey, Daniel, can I just jump in? Because this is
Yeah.
the one area that we see some change within the draft permit where this frequency has become minimum, medium, and maximum effort. So it's an effort allocation. So it's really, you use your judgment. We know that sweeping in the middle of June it doesn't have the advantages as sweeping in the fall. So again, the credit is in there. The credit has been updated. However, frequency, at least in the new permit, it's going to be more of a level of effort. So you don't have to sweep monthly. If you're doing a maximum effort, you're sweeping in the spring during spring cleanup, and then you're sweeping, weekly or during the fall. So it's kind of your judgment. And that's what I just wanted to add that because that's one of the major changes. Because I think what the science is telling us is that, weekly street sweeping is not, it doesn't provide the marginal benefits, especially in the summer, that weekly, more intensive sweeping in the fall does, and in the spring during cleanup. And we also understand that those time periods change. So, weekly is just kind of a easy thing to track, but it's moving towards you categorizing your level of effort. If you're trying to do a maximum level of effort and really doing enhanced collection during the fall and the spring, then you'll be using the weekly column, at least according to the new mass permit. So
Yeah,
then there's another question about just sweeping in the spring. The minimum effort is sweeping twice a year.
yeah, great. So we can update this slide to reflect those changes. But again, pick the most appropriate level of effort, as Damon said, which in the old terminology here is frequency. All right, so that's it. So I'm going to switch my screens and hop over to PTAP, and we'll put those in. And I'm going to start from Google just to remind you how easy it is to get there. I can't remember the actual website to get there, so I'll look up NHDES PTAP. The first hit that comes up is the Pollutant Tracking and Accounting Project. So this is on the blog. And I did put this link directly into the chat, so you guys have it if you want to bookmark it. Again, go down to access the database. A little bigger, there we go. So you'll see once you've logged in, you have a couple options at the top. We've gone over these in workshop 1, but just a quick reminder, add new submission is where we're going to add a new entry like we're going to do today. My submission shows you all of your entries. So if you are a town administrator or site administrator, my submissions will only show you the ones that you've directly entered. If you have the permission level and want to look at all of the entries for your town, that'll be found under reports and all submissions or municipal report. So I'm going to go to add submission. You'll notice in the entry, every field that has a little red asterisk is required field. Anything that's not required is just for your own information. So, put in as much good information as you have, but the minimum for an entry to be accepted into the database and to get credit, you have to fill out all the fields that have the red asterisk. So project name, I'm just going to call this workshop 2 sample. So, I'll check this is for a municipality. It's in the MS4 permit area. The top section is just site, kind of the site and general description or information for your project. So you can fill in whatever is appropriate for that project. You'll notice all of these details about the map number, block number, lot, parcel, property owner. None of these are required. So if you want to track that information, you can, but you don't have to. You do have to select a town. This list will only show up, it will only show the towns that are accessible to you by your user level. Because I'm a site administrator, I can pick any. So I think I'm going to pick on Lee. They don't have any entries yet. So that will be a clean example for today. Land use type is required. So this determines the pollutant load that will be associated with your reduction. So let's go with commercial and industrial for this example. First table, which we covered in workshop 1, is structural BMPs. So we're going to skip that. If you have questions, go back to the recording for workshop 1. Next table here is non-structural. So this is the drop-down menu that Jamie showed in the slide earlier that has all of the options. And so we're going to pick our 2, catch basin cleaning, and then model street sweeping. You'll notice once I clicked on that, another field popped up with the units. So this is where I was talking about it. You have to select your units, so make sure you select the correct units for your entry. For this example, we had 30 catch basins cleaned. The amount is 30. And you can put in a description if you like, it's not required. And then simply add a row to add another non-structural BMP that's in the same entry. So you can add as many rows as you like, as long as the descriptive information at the top reflects each of those entries. So you don't have to put in a single non-structural or structural, for that matter, entry for every single submission. You can group them by all of this information, basically. That has to reflect your entries, your non-structural BMPs. All right, so for the second one, we're going to do modeled street sweeping. And again, a couple new options pop up. You'll see the asterisks for the entries that are required or the fields that are required. We had a mechanical broom twice a year. This is where the months implemented is 12. And units is lane miles. And for our example, we said we had 100 lane miles. So that's it. Again, there's a description field. If you'd like to add a description, you don't have to. Next is land use conversion table. We're skipping that today. Waste management table. We're skipping that today. Make sure you select this checkbox that you're certifying that everything is true and correct, and save. Last thing, when you save, make sure the page loads and you get this green bar at the top. It says your submission has been successfully saved. If you get a red bar that there was a missing field or some sort of error in your submission, that means it was not saved. You can go back down and find the field that has it'll be highlighted in red. So that's it. So that submission is in. So I'm going to go to my submissions now just to check it. You'll see workshop 2, non-structural. The approval status, I just put this in, so it's going to be a new submission, of course. It gives you the town, who submitted it. If you're a town reviewer, a town employee, or a town administrator, a town database administrator, you can sort by approval status in this page here, in the reporting page. So that way, if you want to look at all the new submissions and go ahead and review and update their status, you can filter that here. And these are the different approval statuses. So a new submission is brand new. On hold, means the project is on hold for some reason. If you decide that it's not going through or it's not the right entry, you can reject it. The second to last approval status is submission approved, which means you have approved it, but it's not yet installed or implemented. And the bottom one, approved and implemented, is the only status that gets credit. I'm going to repeat that. Approved and implemented is the only status that gets credit. So if you have 1,000 entries and you're not getting any credit, this is the first place to look. Make sure the projects that are installed and the non-structural BMPs that are implemented for that year, their status has to be approved and implemented. And how you do that, if you have your list of all the entries, you can go through as a town administrator. And over here on the right, there's an operation column. Click on the little caret. That gives you your options to just look at the submission, edit the submission. And these options will vary by your user level. So you'll have to go into edit submission. And all the way at the bottom, after it's been submitted, this is not available on the first add submission page, but now that you're reviewing it as a town administrator, at the very bottom is approval status. This is where you can update that status to approved and implemented. Change the status, click save. And that's it. So when we run the annual report to run the credit calculations, now this entry will be included for credit. So I'm going to check that. I'm going to go back to my submissions, workshop 2. This entry is now approved and implemented. So that's it. So that is how you enter the non-structural. So back to my PowerPoint real quick.
Daniel, can I ask a question from the
Yeah,
chat?
please. I can't see the chat, so thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, so this is an ongoing conversation in the chat, but Eric from Amherst wanted to know, so they haven't been sweeping twice a year historically. They've only been doing it in the spring. Is there a way for them to put it into the system so they get credit for what they've done historically? Could they put 6 months versus 12 months or something like that? Would there be a way, or maybe cut the amount that they've removed in half if to help the calculations?
Yes and no. That's a two-part question. So one, if you do put 6 months, like you said, it would cut your credit in half. So mathematically, that is a way to get half of the frequency. But for non-structural BMPs, you only get credit for the current year, right? So structural BMPs, if you installed it 5 years ago and it's still functioning, you get credit every year. Whereas a non-structural, you only get credit for the current reporting year. And correct me if Jamie or Tom or anybody else, correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
I
wrong.
think that the question is around, so the permit, the MS4 permit defines the minimum criteria, which is twice. So according to the MS4 permit, if you're not sweeping at least twice, you don't have access to the minimum credit. I think Daniel's right. Mathematically, that would be a great way to do it if you really want just an estimate of, what that activity did. You could do the frequency of 6 months. And that would effectively give you the mathematical calculation that you could compare to subsequent years. When you're doing, you have the budget to do 2 times per year, then you would add the 12 months. And I think what I like about that is it allows you as a municipality to account for your activity. So when you're reporting to the council, or when it's time for budgeting, you can demonstrate what the dollars that you're utilizing for this activity actually do in the load reduction. So, I think we can separate the the intention of the permit, I think, is to ever increase implementation and increase your load reduction. And so this is a good way to do it. Um, and I think that's a good solution.
Okay, so the consensus would be 6 months, just puts it, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we realized, pretty early on that, and especially in this last budget season, that we are supposed to be sweeping twice per year. We had only been doing it in the spring. So thankfully, we're budgeted this next year to do that. But, it'd still be nice to get credit for at least what we did. So I think that sounds like a reasonable solution. All right.
Yeah, and the model's very simple. I think Lindsay asked, what does it mean? So twice a year. So again, it gets easier, as one of the things that we did in Clean Sweep is the credits that were in the 2017 permit were a little cumbersome, right? And they didn't actually reflect the activity that was going on, right? So it's kind of crazy to think that you would be sweeping every week, at least on a municipal side. Maybe for a private property owner, you're doing, some sweeping. I used to work at Market Basket. We swept. That was one of my jobs. Is we had a walk behind vacuum sweeper. We swept every day. So a commercial property could take advantage of these credits as well. But from a municipal side, I don't think that level of effort is the reality. So, essentially, the credit is a percent reduction off of the load that's calculated either by the acreage or the lane miles. So the lane miles, all we're doing is we're calculating acreage by adding, an effective 8 foot width of a typical lane mile. So that's generating the acreage, and then the load reduction is a percent of that. The minimum effort is, across the board. And it just means that effectively that you're sweeping at least twice a year. The medium level of effort means that you're doing, more than twice per year. And we purposely tried to keep this a little vague because we didn't want to get too prescriptive. As, math people, I don't want to tell you how to do your job. I mean, you're the best determinant of that. So you understand that level of effort and how that translate into the load reduction. So you can more appropriately pick that category. And then the calculation is just a certain percentage. So for medium effort, you get more percentage off that same area. And then for the maximum effort, that's essentially the maximum credit that the model allows. And it assumes weekly sweeping during the fall. But again, when do the leaves fall? It changes every year. So we don't necessarily, no one's micromanaging saying, you need to sweep every week from September to November. It's like you be the best judge. You know when leaf falls, you know when that load is depositing. And so the expectation is that you're mobilizing and you're mobilizing in an enhanced fashion to get more leaves. It's not just a single sweep. It's a more of a leveraged effort. And so we're asking municipalities to gauge that level of effort and to choose between minimum, medium, and maximum, because I think that better reflects the activity, on the ground. I think the
Great.
weekly, monthly, twice a year is a little arbitrary. I mean, it's good when you're sitting in a chair, but
And Jamie, I'll just add to that. So that's actually a great segue kind of into the measured sweeping. So in the modeled sweeping, it's just twice a year. Back to Lindsay's point, there's one credit. So how you break up the spring and the fall for the modeled, for the modeled approach, there's only one number. So the modeled credit is pretty simple. If you go to measured sweeping, there's two options, fall and non-fall. So this way, if you do have it tracked by season, because there's basically a different load and therefore a different credit, a different reduction for fall and non-fall. So that way, if you do have it measured, you can break up between the two seasons. And the units, if you're curious, you have to measure either cubic yards or tons. So you have a volume or a weight. So I can finish this real quick, and the credit back to this point in the chat. So just to recap, we put in the basic information for the project. The structural BMP was included in workshop 1, so go back to that if you'd like to review. We put in the non-structural controls into PTAP, submitted it, and after the status has been changed to approved and implemented by a town administrator, it can get credit. So that's where we were here, make sure it's approved and constructed or implemented. And then the BAT report, which I'm not going to show how it's done here because I'll be running that for all the towns later in the year. This is the report that you get at the end of the year. So it has a total for your town. So for this example, it gives you a total non-structural, structural, land use, and total credit for phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment. So ultimately, this is the report that you're going to be getting, which is going to be directly submittable to EPA.
yeah. And to answer Mike's question, essentially, we're doing that now for communities because the BAT, it's not, I don't know, the diplomatic way to say is it's cumbersome. And so, we're managing it because we developed a import feature where we can import directly from PTAP right into PTAP and produce those reports. The vision is to automate that and utilize our calculator to make it more updatable on our side as the credits change. And then, while we'll still support communities in the beginning, the vision is to transfer that so that you can do those reports on your own. And you can do the BAT report. We just do it because, again, there's a number of steps and there's a lot of ways for it to go wrong. And then, there's a lot of manipulation of that database, I guess, that we do on our side.
That's it. So maybe we can continue other questions or discussion.
Anything else PTAP related question wise? Hopefully this also helped you know what you have to put in. So as you're going through this and as you're using PTAP, feel free to reach out. We'll get you the answers. Maybe we'll learn something along the way too. I feel like I'm always learning something when the questions come in. But we do have one from FV Environmental. Do we have to have all of the required information to create an entry, or can we start an entry and come back to it later once we've tracked down the prompted information?
Absolutely. You can start the entry and you can save it indefinitely and submit it when it's complete. So, for the non-structural side, I think it's most useful to do this at the end of the year when you do have all your information. And you do, on the non-structural, the difference between non-structural and structural is for the non-structural, you have to update it every year. You might have a baseline already in the database, but the numbers are likely going to change, right? In between years. So, that's the idea is your numbers are changing, your area swept or your lane miles swept or your number of catch basins cleaned are likely increasing. And you just have to update that yearly when you have that information.
And I wanted to add just to maybe clarify, because the way I read this, if you can actually add a submission into the database without all the required information, if that's your question, the answer is no. So every field that has the red asterisk has to be filled for the submission to be saved into the database.
So there's a draft version, but before you submit it, everything has to be included. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that if you go to add submission, and like I was just here. So if you're in add submission and you, for example, just leave it all blank, which means it's not, there's tons of required fields that are not filled out. If you click save, it won't actually save the entry. So at minimum, you have to put in the entries, the fields that have the red asterisk. Again, you can always go back and edit those, but to have it saved, they can't be blank.
Any other questions?
I think another thing that came up, Daniel, you use commercial and industrial land use. If you have mixed land use or if you don't know the land use, the default is medium density residential. So, obviously you can get as sophisticated or easy as you want to make it. You can partition all your areas and your catch basin cleaning into zones by land use or right, commercial, residential, high density residential. You can do that and the model can differentiate. You get a little bit more credit on the high density residential. So you can choose different land uses. If you're aggregating them, then that's where we use the medium density residential because it's really the closest to an average of everything.
All right. I don't see any other questions, so I think we're in good shape. But again, reach out as you're using PTAP, as you're learning. Feel free to ask. Mostly for those that attend the monthly coalition meetings, feel free to bring them up then as well. We can definitely, if Jamie's not available or we don't know the answer, we'll get it for you. But please continue to use it. Again, all data has to be in by July 31st, 2025. So you've got a little over 3 months. Yes, 3 months. Had to do math there for a sec to get that information in. So please start to do that. Start to use it. We're hoping the additional time is more helpful. But again, reach out if you have questions, and if not, we'll let everybody go. Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the amazing weather, and we'll see you guys at the next coalition meeting.